Hi, my name is Alana, and I'm here with Xin Yu, and we will be discussing a color-coded puzzle and how we went about conducting this study. As an overview, we'll be going over the anthropometry, the literature review, a visualization of the operations, and this is going to be shown through diagrams and charts. And then we'll go over the assessment and design of our physical environment that we conducted our research in. And after that, we'll go over the design of the work area, the tools and equipments needed to complete it, to complete the study, that is. And then we'll go over the actual time study itself as well as the results. In the beginning stages of the project, we had to figure out what human system we were going to focus on. And we decided to look into the visualization of a human. So through that, we tried to do some studying and we found coloring. So we wanted to look at color coding for a puzzle that we had. And our hypothesis for this was that the hand-eye coordination would be faster if there was color associated to each row. And humans tend to react faster when color coding is involved with processes like this. Throughout our research, we were able to do some literature review and we found an article that is associated with color coding. And the name of that article is Benefits of Color Coding Weapons Symbology for an Airborne Helmet-Mounted Display. So throughout this article, we read that the pilots were seen to do better when they were utilizing the color-coded symbology. The pilots have to do simulation runs, and this was their practice or their testing of the system. And in their simulations, the pilots who were using the color-coded system, they tended to fire missiles much sooner without having to sacrifice the probability of kill. So we can see here that they were still having accuracy in doing their missile fires, but also doing it at a quickened pace. Some other things that they were looking into was the contrast of colors, because you wouldn't want to use like a dark blue and a dark purple because they're so similar in their color range, and also how vibrant those colors were. Now we'll be going into 3 different charts and diagrams that we looked at or organized to give a better visualization of what our process or operation is doing. The first one is process chart. So there's only 3 that are made because 2 of the methods we used are a little similar, and we assumed through our hypothesis that they would be similar in their averages and everything. So the first one that you see, the smaller one, it starts out with assessing the puzzle setup, which all of them have that, and then it goes into spreading out the pieces, because this would be more of a typical way of putting together a puzzle. It's going to be unorganized and there's no color associated to it. So you would normally spread out the puzzle and then find the edge pieces and put the border together and then put in the center pieces. That's what we saw typically what people would do. So the second one that you see, the one in the middle, again, you're assessing the puzzle setup, and then you're going to spread out the piles of each row. This one would be organized into which row it goes into. So then you would assemble the first row, then move on to the second, third, and fourth. And after all the rows are assembled, then you would put all those 4 rows together to construct the entire puzzle. For the last process chart that we created, again, you're assessing the puzzle setup, and then you would organize the puzzle into rows. So this one would be unorganized, but the pieces to the puzzle would be colored. So, for example, one row would be purple, and then the next row would be green, black, and so on. But through this, you don't have them already organized for you. You would have to pick them out for yourself. So they would organize the pieces into rows and then assemble rows 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then put those rows together. For our next diagram, we have the elementary precedence diagram, and this one's mostly showing a way of how it's going through the system or what goes first. What we have is 6 different nodes we start out with the first node, which is assessing the puzzle, and then we could potentially go into node 2, which would be an organized puzzle, meaning that it is organized into rows, and then we can go to node 4, which is being color, so the puzzle is in a colored fashion, and then we can go into node 6, which would be completing the puzzle. We can also go from, another option is to go from option 1 of assessing the puzzle, going to the third node, which is an unorganized puzzle, and then potentially going to the fourth node, which will be colored. So for this one, you would have to organize the pieces yourself into which row they go into, and then node 6 will be completing the puzzle. And a good way to look at one of these type of diagrams is to have weights on each one of the lines and knowing which process takes the least amount of time, which would be more beneficial for the company to use. The last diagram we'll be showing is the cause and effect diagram. And this diagram is focusing on a problematic area of the study. So what we saw throughout our study is the number of moves that a person was making when they were constructing the puzzle. So how many times they picked up a piece and put it down. And we saw that we wanted to decrease the number of moves. And so for our first thing we can look at is the method, which you can see in the top left corner of the diagram. And it goes into the speed of the person and also the ability to assess the puzzle in the beginning. Throughout the study, we did videos of each person, and we saw that a lot of them were picking up pieces and putting them together, doing a trial and error method, instead of viewing the piece and seeing if it should go that with the next piece or not. So ability to take time and actually process what they're looking at. And then the one beside it is organization. And that one we were looking at like if the puzzle was scattered across the table or if it was organized into piles. And at the bottom part of the chart we have environment, so even the temperature of the room could affect the person and the sounds within that room. Though our location that we chose did not have any problems with these things, it was a quiet environment and the temperature was consistent, so we don't really have too much variability there, but it is also a potentiality to cause problems with the increased number of moves. And then the last one here is color coding. And again, we were looking at if we have used color coding for that particular method, or even if the person was colorblind, which we had not considered previously, and no one informed us that they were colorblind, so it did not bring up any problems with our setup or our testing. But it could be a problem if you were to implement this in any type of manufacturing facility. They would have to be tested on their ability to see colors. For the assessment and design of our physical environment that we conducted the study in, we decided to look at the cleanliness, clutter, disorder, and the noise of the environment. So firstly, we had a table for the participants to use, and it was clean and clear of clutter. But we also had the puzzle itself and a computer to do the recording and a picture of what the puzzle was supposed to look like when it was completed. The puzzle itself was organized into four different ways. So for some of them, the puzzle was scattered across the table. For others, it was organized into 4 little neat piles, and that's what we were changing throughout the conducting of the study. As for the noise, the room was relatively quiet for each participant that was doing the puzzle, and the team still stayed in the room just to ensure that no one would walk in or anything like that. But we were not hovering over them or doing any type of supervision with them completing the puzzle. For the design of the work areas and stations, the team decided to focus on the design of a given work area or station, and this is more in the sense of an actual manufacturing system, in the sense of if they have parts, they can do an organized way of doing it, as in looking at how to group the different parts for assembling something. And or having them colored into sections as well. So, as for the organization of the pieces, that compares to organizing things within a manufacturing facility, which was just explained a little bit. And then the coloring of the pieces compares to color coding the assembly pieces to reduce the amount of times for deciding which piece comes next in the process. As well, we look at having an organized work area to be a key to the efficiency of the employee doing the assembly. It helps with the correct assembly in the sense that you know which color comes next in your process, and then also keeping track of the parts. This more follows into the organization of the pieces, because it is quite known that when things are in a big group, like big pieces and small pieces, it's hard to find the smaller pieces, or even know that they are in that pile itself. So another thing is the speed of the task as well. So the main things that we wanted to know is the speed and accuracy of the entire process compared to the color and organization of the pieces or puzzle pieces that we're using for our model. Now to discuss the actual time study that we did. The puzzle that we used was a 24-piece puzzle, and it was a 4x6, meaning that it had 4 different rows and 6 different columns. We had 2 of the exact same puzzles purchased. One of them we colored it and by the rows, so it was 4 different colors used, because again, I said there was 4 rows in the puzzle. And then we also had one that we left blank because that's the way it came, and we didn't want that one to be colored because of the test that we chose. And the types of tests will be discussed in the next slide. So throughout the test, we were looking at how well the person performed in constructing the puzzle and like the different conditions they started with. And then we also looked at how long it took them to complete the puzzle, as well as the number of moves it took them. So picking up a piece and putting it down, how many times they did that. And also we looked at the overall approach to how the participant was solving the puzzle. For the actual tests that we were looking at, we had 4 different types of tests or methods that we used. So the first one is organized with color, meaning that the puzzle pieces were stacked into 4 different little piles associated to which row they went in. So the first row would be one little stack, second row another stack, and then we also had colors associated to that. So the colors would be purple, one group of pieces for the first row maybe, and then black for the next row, and so on. So individuals were told that the pieces were color-coded and grouped by their rows. And then type 2, we had unorganized with color, meaning that we had the pile of pieces in one central area, and then they were also colored according to which row they went in. So through this method, individuals were told that the pieces had a color associated to each row. And then for type 3, we did an organized no color. So it again had 4 little stacks, and they were organized into which row they went in, and individuals were told that the pieces were grouped by rows. And then for the 4th type, we had unorganized no color, which this one is a more general way of how people solve a puzzle. It was just a small little pile of the puzzle pieces scattered amongst themselves.
Type 1 test is when each row is color-coded and the pieces are grouped by rows. 4 rows, so 4 groups. For this test, participants were told that the pieces were color-coded and then grouped by rows. For Type 2 test, the pieces were unorganized, but they were still color-coded by rows, so they could have categorized them into each row if they wanted to. Individuals were told that the pieces were color-coded by rows in this case. Type 3 test was a little different. The pieces are no longer color-coded, but for this test, they are still categorized in their rows or grouped by their rows, so 4 groups. Participants were told that the pieces were grouped by rows. Type 4 was meant more as a control. It was unorganized and no color, so it was solving the puzzle as any other puzzle. The pieces were left scrambled and they were not color-coded or grouped, and participants were just told to complete the puzzle in this case. For this time study, we hypothesized that type 1, organized and colored, would take the least amount of time and movement. Type 2, unorganized and colored, could be completed relatively fast, but sorting the colors does take time and add up to the number of pieces being picked up, or number of times the pieces were picked up. Type 3 is organized and it did not have color, but we hypothesized that this should take about the same amount of time as type 1 if solved row by row. Type 4, we hypothesized would take the longest because it was unorganized and no color, so it would be solving any other puzzles. How we conducted the time study is we put an equal amount of each number, 1, 2, and 3, in a cup, and so that all the tests get measured by the same amount. Participants will randomly pick a number from the cup to decide the test they were taking. Then they were timed and filmed later so that we could count their movements and make a movement analysis. Participants had to perform in the study in room 3382 to maintain a consistent environment so that we didn't have too much variability. Participants were also told to face the back wall to minimize outside distractions because the classroom had glass. We also set up rules on how we were going to count the moves because there was too much variability. So every time the participant picked up a piece and placed it back down, it counted as a move. However, if they picked up more than one piece at once, and it would just be counted as a move. But if they were to place all the pieces down together, it would only be counted as one. If they placed the pieces down one by one while still holding a group of pieces, each time they put a piece down would count as one. A lot of the times participants would shuffle the pieces around, so it made it very difficult to count. So when the pieces were being shuffled around, it did not count as a move. It was only count as a move if they pushed a piece and assembled them together. We try to only count the very deliberate moves where the actual pieces were moved around and being assembled together. How we recorded the data is we used Excel and we just recorded their name, the number they picked, so that would determine the type of test they took, and then we recorded the time it took them to finish the puzzle, and then later on we watched the videos to analyze the number of times they reached for the puzzle pieces, and then the comments is just an analysis on their approach to solving the puzzle and comments on how they decided to scramble them or put them together. As for the results, we hypothesized that type 1, organized and colored, would take the least amount of time and moves, followed by type 3, organized but no color, taking the second fastest. We also hypothesized that type 4, which is just the scrambled puzzle, would take the longest, but did not anticipate that type 2, which is unorganized but still color-coded, took more moves to complete. Specifically for test type number 1, we predicted that participants would assemble the puzzles row by row and then connect all 4 rows. However, and participants were also told that the puzzles were organized and color-coded by rows. However, some people did not pay attention to instructions and shuffled the pieces, only to realize later that the colors did represent the different rows. Some people thought that when we asked them to do this study, that us telling them the instructions were a trap or a way to confuse them, so they decided to take a different approach. And when participants did not follow the predicted pattern, more moves were added. For test type number 2, we predicted that the participants would first sort the puzzles by color and then assemble the puzzles row by row, and then connecting all 4 rows. Participants were told that the puzzles were color-coded by rows. Common mistakes were participants did not pay attention and then solved it as a normal scrambled puzzle. Some realized later on that the colors did matter, and some people also thought that us telling them these instructions were some sort of trap. The number of moves here was the highest because participants spent more time because they were sorting it first before they completed the puzzle. In test type number 3, we predicted that participants would just solve them row by row since it was already categorized, and they were told that the puzzles were categorized by rows. However, some participants did not pay attention to the instructions when they were told, and they scrambled the puzzle pieces, but because they were not color-coded, it was just solved as a normal puzzle. For every test type, though, there were some participants that always thought the instructions were a trap and decided to make their own approaches. It took longer most of the time because participants would just scramble them and then solved it by finding the edges first instead of how we predicted it. For test type number 4, we predicted that participants would solve it like any other puzzle, and the most common way was to find all the edge pieces and then fill in the middle. Participants were not told anything except to complete the puzzle. Hypothesized that it would take the longest and the most amount of moves, but type 2 had more moves because participants were sorting the pieces first. And this was very interesting to learn because we thought this would be the one that took the most. It did take the longest to complete, but not by a lot compared to type 2 and type 3. To conclude, we wanted to test out the different ways to set up an assembly, and we tried to see whether organizing and color coding the parts would make it faster or longer to assemble. Moves added up pretty quickly when participants had to sort, but after sorting it, it took very little time to complete the puzzle. The test indeed showed that organizing the pieces into categories and color coding them did help speed up the assembly process, and it took less work. It was a more efficient approach. It also showed that if the pieces were scrambled, it did not take much for the participant to be able to figure out and categorize them again. Thank you for watching our presentation.